They found DNA inside her house. Not one sample, multiple. And here is where this case stops sounding like every missing person story you have heard before and starts sounding like something far more disturbing. Because that DNA, recovered from the home of an 84-year-old woman who vanished in the dead of night in Tucson, Arizona, cannot be matched to anyone. Not yet. A partial unknown profile, low level, mixed with the genetic material of others. Sitting inside a forensic lab in Florida right now, resisting every attempt to untangle it. The glove found 2 miles from the house? Same result. Submitted to the FBI's national database. No match. And here is the detail that most coverage breezes past entirely. Those 2 DNA sources, the one from inside the house and the one from that glove, do not even match each other. You have heard this case mentioned, you have seen the headlines, but what you are about to hear in this video is not a recap. This is a forensic breakdown of exactly what that DNA evidence means, what is standing in the way of using it, and what the science of investigative genetic genealogy is doing right now that could change everything, in a matter of hours or a matter of years. Nobody knows which. That uncertainty is the heartbeat of this entire investigation. So, before we go anywhere else, subscribe and hit that notification bell right now. This case is moving fast, and every update to this DNA story matters. You do not want to miss the next chapter. Now, let's go to Tucson. He had been there before. That is not speculation. That is confirmed by federal sources and released surveillance images. A masked individual approached the front door of Nancy Guthrie's home in the quiet Catalina Foothills neighborhood on a day prior to February 1st, 2026. In that earlier image, there is no backpack on his shoulders. There is no weapon visible. He stands there, studies the layout, clocks the Nest doorbell camera mounted near the entrance. And then he leaves. He does not panic. He does not rush. He simply walks away and goes home to plan. That detail alone separates this suspect from opportunistic criminals. What you are looking at is premeditation across multiple days. A surveillance visit followed by a return trip with the tools to execute a plan. Think about what that requires. The patience, the calculation, the discipline to come back a second time knowing a camera is watching. It's because when he came back on the morning of February 1st, he came ready for that camera. It is the early hours of Sunday, February 1st, 2026. The Catalina foothills sit tucked against the Santa Catalina Mountains northeast of Tucson. This is not a transient neighborhood. These are established streets, people who have lived here for decades, homes surrounded by desert landscaping, and the kind of stillness that settles over the city after midnight. Nancy Guthrie had lived in this community for more than 50 years. She knew her neighbors. Her routines were consistent. On the evening before, Saturday, January 31st, she had dinner at her daughter Annie's home. Her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, drove her back to her house at approximately 9:45 in the evening. She went inside. The night was quiet. Then the footage begins. The masked individual returns to her door in the dark hours of February 1st. This time he is carrying a black 25-liter Ozark Trail Hiker backpack, a model sold exclusively at Walmart. His hands are gloved. His face is fully concealed. What appears to be a firearm sits in a holster at his side. He approaches the Nest doorbell camera first. He attempts to disable it with his gloved hand, pressing against the device with light, deliberate taps. When the camera doesn't go dark, he reaches down, pulls foliage from a potted plant beside the door, and presses it directly over the lens, blocking the view entirely. Then the camera is removed from the premises. At approximately 1:47 in the morning, the device goes offline. At 2:12 a.m., in the back-end system connected to that doorbell, which had been continuously looping and overwriting footage due to the lack of an active subscription, detected motion near the home. There is a gap here, a window of time where the recordings available do not capture a clear visual. Investigators, working in partnership with the technology company, have been combing through residual back-end data to reconstruct what happened in that gap. As of the time this video was made, that recovery effort is still ongoing. Then, at 2:28 a.m., something else records a signal no one was meant to know about. Nancy Guthrie had a cardiac monitoring device implanted to regulate her heartbeat. That device was connected to a monitoring application on her phone. At 2:28 in the morning, it disconnected. Her phone stayed inside the house. Her medication stayed inside the house. Her personal items were untouched. That 2:28 a.m. disconnection became one of the most significant forensic timestamps in the entire investigation. The closest thing investigators have to a precise record of when Nancy Guthrie was removed from her home against her will. She was scheduled to watch a virtual church live stream that Sunday morning. She did it almost every week. When she did not appear, a church member reached out to the family. Relatives arrived at the house at approximately 11:56 a.m. They walked through the rooms. They saw her things. They did not see her. The 911 call came in at 12:03 p.m. Deputies from the Pima County Sheriff's Department arrived at the home at 12:15 p.m. What had started as a welfare check became, within hours, a full federal abduction investigation involving local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies simultaneously. And when forensic teams moved through that house with their collection kits and their evidence bags and their ultraviolet lights, when they swabbed surfaces and bagged items and documented every corner of that property, they found DNA. Ask yourself this: if you were that detective standing in that house and your lab told you there was DNA, unknown DNA, from someone who had no legitimate reason to be inside that home, how confident would you feel? The science should be on your side. The answer should be close. Except the Pima County Sheriff stood in front of cameras and confirmed something that changed the entire forensic picture of this investigation. The DNA found inside Nancy Guthrie's home is mixed, contaminated with the genetic material of multiple people, partial, low level, and as of February 24, 2026, confirmed by sources close to the investigation speaking to multiple national outlets, that sample is not viable for entry into CODIS in its current state. That is not the end of the story. Not even close. But it is the beginning of understanding why, 26 days after Nancy Guthrie vanished, the person who walked into her home in the dark is still unidentified. And it is the reason the science of investigative genetic genealogy, the same tool that finally named the Golden State Killer after more than 4 decades, is now the investigation's most critical forensic thread. But before we go inside that lab, just before we break down exactly what that partial unknown profile can and cannot do, there is something about what was found on a roadside 2 miles from Nancy's home that you need to hear. Because the DNA on that glove tells a different part of the story. And the fact that it does not match what was found inside the house raises a question that investigators have not yet answered publicly. That question is next. There is a video clip from the Today Show, November 2025, just 3 months before she vanished. Nancy Guthrie is sitting across a lunch table from her daughter at El Charro, a beloved Tucson restaurant she had been going to for decades. She is laughing. She tilts her head back the way people do when something is genuinely funny, not performatively funny. Savannah asks her what it is about Tucson that made her want to plant roots here all those years ago. Nancy thinks for a half second and then says simply, "Just the air." The quality of life is laid back and gentle. That is who Nancy Guthrie is, not was, is. She was born Nancy Ellen Long on January 27, 1942, in Fort Wright, Kentucky, a small community sitting just across the Ohio River from Cincinnati. She grew up there, went on to study at the University of Kentucky, and graduated with a degree before marrying Charles Errol Guthrie on December 28, 1963. Charles was a mining engineer, the kind of work that took families across borders and time zones in a way that most people never experience. The Guthries lived that life fully. Charles's work eventually brought them to Melbourne, Australia, where their youngest child, Savannah, was born in December 1971. They were a family shaped by movement, by adaptability, by the particular closeness that comes from navigating the world together in places where you know nobody else. And when the family eventually landed in Tucson in the early 1970s, something clicked. The desert, the mountains framing the skyline, the light. Nancy never left. More than 50 years later, she was still there, still in the same community she had chosen when her children were small, still attending the same church, still living in the home that had become as much a part of her identity as her name. Then 1988 arrived. Charles Guthrie, 50 years old and still working in the field he had built his career in, died suddenly during a mining exploration trip in Mexico. He was 49 years old. The loss was sudden. It was seismic. Savannah has spoken publicly about what that moment did to their family, describing it as losing the ground beneath them in a way that changed everything. And in the middle of all of it, Nancy Guthrie held. She did not collapse. She set aside her own grief, her daughter's words, not an assumption, and she kept the family together. She raised 3 children as a single mother in a desert city, and she did it with what people who knew her describe as an almost unmovable steadiness. Her son, Cameron Guthrie, flew F-16 fighter jets for the United States military for 26 years. Her daughter Annie stayed close to home. Her youngest, Savannah, became one of the most recognized journalists in American broadcasting, a co-anchor of the Today Show, a former White House correspondent, a Georgetown law graduate who scored the highest mark on the Arizona bar exam the year she took it. None of that happens without a foundation. And that foundation, by every account from the people who know this family, was Nancy. She was not just a mother. She was the architecture of this family. But here is the detail that makes this case what it is. Because the person who walked into Nancy Guthrie's home in the early hours of February 1st, 2026, did not take a healthy woman in her prime. They took a woman who, according to Sheriff Chris Nanos, could not walk more than 50 yards unassisted. A woman who required daily medication to manage ongoing health conditions. A woman whose cardiac monitoring device was implanted because her heart needed external help to regulate its own rhythm. An 84-year-old woman living alone in a house in the foothills, independent and sharp. The sheriff specifically said she was of great sound mind, that this was not a dementia-related disappearance in any way, but physically fragile in ways that make every hour she is missing carry a medical weight that law enforcement is acutely aware of. Savannah said it directly in a public video, her voice breaking at the edges. She is without her medicine. She is without her daily medications. She is living in what Savannah described as constant pain. And the longer she is gone, the more that physical reality bears down on every investigator working this case. This is not a detail that humanizes the case in a sentimental way. It is a forensic and investigative urgency. Because whoever took Nancy Guthrie knew, or should have known, that they were not just removing a person from a house. They were separating an elderly woman from the medical infrastructure keeping her alive. That speaks to either a profound indifference to her survival or to a very specific calculation about leverage. And that word, leverage, brings us back to the DNA. Because if you want to understand why investigators are working through a forensic lab in Florida right now, trying to untangle mixed genetic samples from inside the home of a woman with 50 years of deep community roots in Tucson, you have to understand who she is to that community. Nancy Guthrie was not isolated, so she was known. Her home had been touched by family members, friends, churchgoers, service workers, neighbors. The genetic material of a legitimate community of people is woven into every surface of that house. And that is precisely why the partial unknown profile, the one that doesn't match any of them, is so difficult to isolate. The question investigators are sitting with right now is not just who left that DNA. It is how someone calculated that this woman, in this house, in this quiet neighborhood, was the right target. That calculation requires knowledge. It requires prior observation. It requires something. What that something is, that is where this investigation goes next. It started as an ordinary Saturday evening. At approximately 5:32 in the afternoon on January 31st, 2026, Nancy Guthrie took an Uber from her home in the Catalina foothills to the house of her daughter, Annie, just a short drive away. But investigators have since interviewed that Uber driver who shared dashcam footage from inside the vehicle. He is not under suspicion. Nancy sat in the back seat, riding through the late afternoon Tucson light the way she had done countless times before. She arrived at Annie's home, had dinner, played card games with the family. A completely ordinary evening shared between a mother and her children. After dinner, her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, drove her home. He did not just drop her at the curb, yet he waited. He watched her garage door open at approximately 9:48 p.m. and close again at 9:50. Sheriff Nanos confirmed that detail specifically. In his words, "It is at that time we assume Nancy's home and probably going to bed." Cioni drove away. The house went dark and quiet. Nancy Guthrie went to sleep in the home she had lived in for decades, in the desert city she had chosen as her own 50 years before. That was the last confirmed visual of her alive. And what happened next is a question investigators are still working to fully reconstruct. But the technology inside and around that house left behind a sequence of timestamps that trace the outline of something deeply calculated. At 1:47 in the morning, the Nest doorbell camera at the front of the house disconnected from the network. Not a power failure. Not a technical glitch. The device was deliberately disabled. Approximately 25 minutes later, a separate secondary camera on the property detected movement. Something or someone near the home. The footage from that window was not immediately available because the camera had been operating without an active subscription, causing it to continuously loop and overwrite its own recording. The FBI, working in partnership with the technology company, began the painstaking process of trying to recover any residual data still stored in the device's back-end system. And then, at exactly 2:28 in the morning, the monitoring application connected to Nancy Guthrie's cardiac device disconnected from her phone. Her phone was still in the house. The device was not. That 16-minute gap between the secondary camera detecting movement at 2:12 a.m. and the cardiac monitor disconnecting at 2:28 is the window investigators believe she was taken. Not walked out, not driven away voluntarily. Taken. By someone who had arrived prepared, who had already been to this house before. and who understood exactly which pieces of technology needed to be neutralized first. By noon the following morning, when her family walked through the rooms and found everything in its place, except Nancy herself, the full weight of those timestamps came into focus. Detectives did not need a witness to tell them what had happened here. The house told them. The timestamps told them. And the DNA those forensic teams were about to collect from inside that home was going to tell them something too. Something complicated, something incomplete, and something that would send this investigation in a direction no one expected. But before we get to that DNA, there is one more detail from that night that the sheriff disclosed quietly, almost as a footnote, that reframes the entire picture of what forensic teams walked into when they first arrived at this house. That detail is next. When forensic teams walked through that front door on the afternoon of February 1st, they were not walking into a cold, untouched scene. They were walking into a home that had been lived in for decades. 50 years of life in a single space. Fingerprints on every light switch, DNA on every surface from every person who had ever sat at that kitchen table, embraced a family member in that hallway, helped Nancy in and out of a chair in that living room. The house was full of people, not physically, but forensically. And that is precisely the problem investigators are still trying to solve. The forensic collection process was meticulous. Teams moved room by room, swabbing surfaces, bagging items, documenting every contact point. The biological evidence consistent with Nancy Guthrie's own profile was confirmed near the entrance of the residence, a detail that added immediate gravity to what investigators already suspected. This was not a voluntary departure. This was a scene that told a story, and as the lab analysis began, it told a complicated one. Here is what the science returned. The DNA samples collected from inside Nancy Guthrie's home are what forensic scientists call mixed profiles. That means within a single swab, from a single surface, a single object, the genetic material of more than one person is present simultaneously. Untangling a mixed profile is not like solving a simple equation. It is like trying to separate two voices singing the same note at different pitches, recorded on the same tape, with background noise underneath both of them. What the lab has to computationally isolate each contributor, assign statistical probability to each component profile, and determine whether any of those contributors is unknown, meaning someone with no legitimate reason to have left their genetic material in that house. And they found one. Buried inside the complexity of those mixed samples is a partial profile from an unknown individual. Low level, incomplete, but there. The lab confirmed its existence. The sheriff confirmed it publicly. And then he confirmed something else. Something that landed like a door slamming shut on the investigation's most important lead. There has been a snag. Sheriff Nanos told NBC News there has been a snag at the private lab in Florida testing mixed DNA samples found at Nancy Guthrie's home. He offered no specific timeline for resolution, and he said the process could take weeks, it could take months. The sample is still being worked. The profile is still incomplete. Now, here is where this case takes a turn that almost no one in the national media has fully examined. Because the lab processing this evidence is not the FBI's own facility. It is not Quantico. It is a private forensic company called DNA Labs International, based in Florida. And the decision to send the evidence there, instead of directly to the FBI's laboratory, ignited a fierce and very public dispute between the sheriff's office and one of the country's leading forensic genealogy firms. The co-founder of Othram, the Texas-based lab that helped crack the Brian Kohberger identification in the Idaho student case, publicly called the decision to use DNA Labs International, and the word she chose was not mild. So she called it devastating. Her argument, DNA Labs International is a traditional forensic lab. It processes evidence to build what is called an STR profile, a short tandem repeat profile using approximately 20 genetic markers. That is the standard profile format required for CODIS comparison, but it consumes evidence in the process. And if the sample is already low-level and partial, consuming any part of it to build a standard profile risks degrading or destroying the very material that investigative genetic genealogy would need to use hundreds of thousands of markers to search for a family match. Sheriff Nanos pushed back. His position, the department had been using that Florida lab from the beginning of the investigation. Guthrie family DNA and other comparative samples had already been sent there. By splitting evidence across two separate labs, he argued, creates the risk of conflicting results and adds unnecessary procedural steps. One lab, one pipeline, one chain of custody. Ask yourself, if you were the detective sitting in the middle of that disagreement, who would you listen to? The sheriff defending a decision already made, or the forensic scientist watching a potentially irreplaceable sample move through a process she believes is the wrong one? That tension between the traditional forensic approach and the cutting-edge genealogy science is the fault line running beneath this entire investigation. And it matters because the answer to where Nancy Guthrie is may depend entirely on which side of that line gets the sample it needs. But before we get to that science, there is a second piece of DNA evidence in this case, one that was not found inside the house, one that was found on the side of a road 2 miles away, in the desert light of a Tucson afternoon. And what that sample told investigators when it came back from the lab is the detail that changed the shape of this entire forensic picture. That is next. 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's front door, in a field along the side of a road, investigators found a glove. Not just any glove. During the search operation, law enforcement recovered multiple gloves across the surrounding area, most of them discarded during the search effort itself, quickly cataloged and eliminated. But this one was different. The moment it was examined, something stood out. The material, the color, the style. It appeared visually, so specifically to match the gloves worn by the masked individual captured on the doorbell camera footage at Nancy's front door. The FBI confirmed that assessment publicly. That glove went directly into an evidence bag and was sent to Florida for DNA analysis. The wait was tense. Investigators and the public both understood what a clean DNA profile from that glove could mean. If the person who left genetic material on that glove had a prior qualifying arrest in any state that required a DNA submission, CODIS would return a name, an address, a face behind the mask. The case could pivot from forensic uncertainty to targeted investigation within hours of the result coming back. On February 17, 2026, the Pima County Sheriff's Department posted an update to their official account. The DNA profile recovered from the glove had been submitted to CODIS. The result? No match. Not a partial hit. Not a near miss. No match anywhere in a database containing the profiles of more than 26 million individuals. But that is not even the detail that changed the shape of this investigation. Sheriff Nanos went further. The DNA recovered from that glove, he confirmed, did not match the DNA recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's home either. Two separate, unknown profiles. Two separate genetic sources. One from inside the house where she lived. One from a glove on a roadside 2 miles away, appearing to match what the suspect wore that night. And they do not match each other. Ask yourself what that means for a moment. because there are only a few explanations for two non-matching unknown profiles in the same investigation. The glove could belong to someone entirely unconnected to the case, a coincidence of visual similarity. The sample from inside the house could have been compromised by the mixing problem described in the lab. Or there is a third possibility that investigators have not ruled out and have not commented on publicly. One that changes the profile of this crime in ways that matter enormously to where the search goes next. Sheriff Nanos offered a measured response when pressed on the CODIS failure. His words were deliberate. He said the glove 2 miles away was not his priority. He said the partial DNA found inside the house, low-level, mixed, still being untangled in a Florida lab, was what he considered the more critical lead. And then he said something that reframed the entire forensic picture of this case in a single sentence. Now they start with genealogy. That statement, quiet, almost offhand, is the most significant forensic development in this investigation since the doorbell footage was released. Because what genealogy means in this context is not a website and a family tree. It is a scientific process that cracked one of the most elusive cold cases in American history. And understanding exactly how it works and exactly what it needs to succeed is what determines whether this case gets solved in 20 minutes or 7 years. Most people hear the words "no match" in CODIS, and they picture a dead end, a door closing, the investigation stalling out while investigators stare at a screen that has nothing to tell them. But that is not what is happening here. And understanding the difference between those two things, a dead end and a redirected road, is the key to understanding where this case is going. CODIS is not a database of every person who has ever existed. It is not even a database of every person who has ever committed a crime. It is a database of individuals who were convicted of qualifying offenses, primarily violent crimes and felonies, or in certain states, those who were arrested for those offenses and who had a DNA sample collected and submitted by a participating forensic laboratory. The forensic unknown profile attributed to the suspected perpetrator is searched against a state database of convicted offender and arrestee profiles. Not all states collect DNA from arrestees. Not all crimes require a DNA submission. And critically, the CODIS database does not contain any personal identifying information, such as the name associated with the DNA profile. Names are held only by the submitting laboratory. CODIS works by numeric comparison, not personal identification. So what does a miss actually tell investigators? It tells them one precise thing. Whoever left that DNA has never had a qualifying sample collected and submitted to the national system. That is not nothing. It is a profile, a behavioral profile as much as a biological one. Now lay that information against what the doorbell footage already showed. A suspect who visited the property on at least 2 separate occasions before February 1st, who arrived the second time with a backpack, a mask, gloves, and what appeared to be a firearm. Who knew to disable the camera first? Who understood that a Nest device records and stores? Who knew enough about the house's layout to move through it in the dark? This is not impulsive behavior. This is not a first offense profile. And yet, no record, no prior qualifying submission anywhere in a system that, as of the most recent federal data, holds the profiles of more than 26 million individuals across all 50 states. That combination, extreme premeditation with zero criminal database history, tells investigators something important about who they are looking for. Either this person has committed crimes that were never prosecuted at the qualifying level, or they have operated with enough discipline across whatever history they carry to have never been formally arrested for something that required a DNA sample. Either way, That profile shapes the investigative approach entirely, and it makes the next forensic tool, the one Sheriff Nanos confirmed they are now pursuing, not just the next option. It makes it the only option left in the science. Because where CODIS requires an exact match to a known profile, what comes next requires something far simpler. It just needs a cousin, a third cousin, a distant relative who uploaded their own DNA to a public website, not thinking about crime at all, just curious about where their grandmother came from. That tool, and what it has already done to cases that were decades cold, is what we are getting into next. A Q-tip, a pizza crust, a piece of tissue pulled from a trash bag outside a house in Pennsylvania. Those are the items that helped crack 3 of the most prominent criminal cases in recent American history. The University of Idaho murders, the Golden State Killer, the Gilgo Beach slayings. Not a confession, not a witness. Discarded objects, ordinary things. You're carrying microscopic biological material that a forensic genealogist fed into a science that did not exist as an investigative tool a decade ago. That same science is now being applied to the partial unknown DNA profile recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's home. And understanding how it actually works, what it needs, what it cannot do without, and where the limitations are, is the difference between understanding this case and simply watching it from a distance. An investigative forensic genetic genealogy, referred to in the science community as FIGG, is not CODIS. It does not require a direct match to a known offender profile. What it requires is something far more accessible, a relative, not the suspect themselves, but someone who shares a portion of their genetic code. A second cousin, a third cousin, someone who uploaded their own DNA to a public ancestry platform years ago, curious about their family history, completely unaware that their profile would one day sit inside a database that a forensic genealogist is now combing through on behalf of a federal investigation. The 2 databases law enforcement is permitted to use for this purpose are GED Match and Family Tree DNA. Both operate on an opt-in basis. Users choose to make their DNA available for law enforcement searches. That consent-based model is why those 2 platforms are accessible, while Ancestry, 23andMe, and MyHeritage are not. And those companies require a court order or search warrant before they will engage with any law enforcement request. As of the most recent data available, Ancestry says it has not received any valid requests to produce data in recent years. The gap in database size between what investigators can freely access versus what they cannot is enormous. Barbara Ray Venter, the genealogist who helped crack the Golden State Killer case, I put it plainly, the 2 permitted databases hold less than 2 million profiles combined, while Ancestry, 23andMe, or MyHeritage hold 10 to 20 times as many. That limitation matters enormously in an active investigation where time is not a resource investigators have in abundance. The process itself, when it works, is extraordinary. A genealogist uploads the unknown profile to GEDmatch, or Family Tree DNA, and receives a list of individuals whose DNA overlaps with it, not as a direct match, but as a shared segment indicating biological relation. Even a 1% shared segment can be meaningful. From there, the genealogist begins the slow, methodical process of building a family tree around every matching profile, working backward through generations, identifying shared ancestors, then forward again through every branch of the family that could potentially include a male of the right age and geography. C.C. Moore, one of the country's leading forensic genetic genealogists, he told CNN the process can go as quickly as 20 minutes, or it can take 7.5 years. The difference between those two outcomes is almost entirely determined by one thing: how many relatives of the unknown individual have voluntarily uploaded their DNA to the permitted databases. In the Golden State Killer case, a search of GED match returned a match to a probable fourth cousin. See, it then took approximately 4 months of family tree construction and investigative legwork to narrow the pool of potential suspects down to males of the right age and geography who could have committed the crimes. Former police officer Joseph James D'Angelo, who had been part of a task force investigating the very killings he had committed, was identified. Investigators collected a tissue from his trash. The DNA matched. He was 72 years old when he was arrested, and he is now serving life without parole. The science works. It has worked in case after case since 2018. But in the Nancy Guthrie investigation, it faces the same obstacle that has defined this entire forensic chapter. The sample has to be viable enough to produce a profile that can be uploaded. Low level, partial, mixed. 3 words that have followed this DNA evidence from the moment it was collected. The 3 words that determine whether the most powerful forensic genealogy tool available to law enforcement gets to do its job at all. And that is the race that is happening right now, in a lab in Florida. With a sample that one of the country's leading forensic genealogy companies has already called a devastating choice of destination, the clock is running, and Nancy Guthrie is still missing. But while the science works through its challenges, investigators have not been sitting still, and they have been running every physical evidence thread they have in parallel: a backpack, a holster, a pacemaker signal, and a helicopter flying low and slow over the Tucson desert. That is next. While the DNA lab in Florida works through its challenges, investigators are not standing still. They are running every physical evidence thread available to them in parallel. And some of those threads are more traceable than a partial DNA profile. Some of them lead directly to a cash register. The backpack is the first thread. The black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack, visible on the suspect's shoulders in the doorbell footage, is not a generic item. It is sold exclusively at Walmart. Sheriff Nanos called it one of the most promising leads in the case. Walmart management has been coordinating directly with law enforcement, pulling sales records for that specific model across Arizona locations going back several months, to providing investigators with a data trail that could narrow the pool of possible buyers to a manageable number. Investigators are also reviewing in-store surveillance footage at local Walmart locations. Every purchase has a record. Every record has a date, a time, and if the buyer used any form of payment other than cash, a name. The holster is the second thread. Sheriff Nanos confirmed in an NBC News interview that investigators have identified what he described as a holster with some pretty unique characteristics. Canvassing gun shops across the region, detectives are showing the footage to shop owners and staff, asking if anyone recognizes the make of the holster, the firearm it was designed to carry, or the person wearing it. As of late February, the holster has not yet been publicly identified, but that work is ongoing, quietly, one gun shop at a time. Then there is the pacemaker. This is where the investigation deployed something that most people did not know existed. A portable radio detection device, known operationally as a signal sniffer, was mounted to the skid of a Pima County Sheriff's helicopter and flown slowly at low altitude over the Tucson area in a systematic grid pattern. The device works by scanning continuously for Bluetooth signals, filtering out every emission it does not recognize until it locks onto the unique MAC address, the device identifier, registered to Nancy Guthrie's specific cardiac monitor. Morgan Wright, CEO of the National Center for Open and Unsolved Cases, described the process as similar to walking through a crowded room with someone's phone. waiting for their specific Bluetooth device to connect, except with industrial-grade signal amplification and a search radius measured in hundreds of feet, not inches. The helicopter flew. The device scanned. President Donald Trump publicly criticized investigators for disclosing the technology before using it, stating that if someone had the device and was aware of the search method, they could take steps to prevent detection. His concern was not abstract. It was a direct acknowledgement that the person who took Nancy Guthrie might be monitoring the investigation closely enough to adapt. And it is a detail that reframes the suspect profile once again. Someone disciplined, attentive, and very possibly still watching. As of February 25th, investigators confirmed they are still working to locate the cardiac device. No signal has been publicly confirmed as detected. The search continues. But while all of this is happening, the Walmart records, the gun shops, the helicopter grid, and the Florida lab, the volume of incoming information has reached a scale that creates its own set of problems. And one piece of that information, received just one day after Nancy vanished, has been sitting at the edge of this investigation from the very beginning. Unverified, unconfirmed, but impossible to ignore. That is next. On the morning of February 3rd, 2026, just 2 days after Nancy Guthrie vanished, TMZ received a note, not a tip, not a lead, an alleged ransom demand. And the note arrived via the outlet's tip line and demanded millions of dollars in Bitcoin for Nancy's safe return. It included a specific Bitcoin wallet address, a deadline, and what reporters described as an element of urgency attached to the consequence of non-payment. The same note, or a version of it, was sent simultaneously to 2 Tucson television stations, Cold News 13 and K-Gun 9. All 3 outlets forwarded the correspondence immediately to the FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Department. The sheriff's office posted to their official account the same day, acknowledging they were aware of reports circulating about possible ransom correspondence in the investigation. Their statement was measured. They confirmed nothing, denied nothing, and said only that everything coming in goes directly to detectives coordinating with the FBI. That measured silence has not changed since. As of the time this video was made, law enforcement has neither confirmed nor denied the authenticity of any ransom correspondence in this case. But the notes kept coming. A second alleged note arrived at one of the Tucson stations containing a different deadline, 5 p.m. on Monday, February 9th. KGUN9 reported that the demands in the first note had reached $6 million in Bitcoin. Both deadlines passed without any confirmed contact between the family and the alleged sender. No proof of life was ever provided in response to the family's direct request for it. Then, a second note emerged, conclusively determined to be fake. The FBI arrested the sender, stating publicly he was attempting to profit from the case, and there was no evidence connecting him to Nancy's disappearance. Then a third email arrived at TMZ, this one not claiming to be the person responsible, but claiming to have information about who was responsible and demanding 1 Bitcoin in exchange for that name. A retired FBI agent who reviewed the language of the notes told the New York Post that one detail stood out as unusual. The notes used the term USD for dollars, a phrasing that an American would be unlikely to use naturally. His assessment: this could indicate someone from overseas, or someone deliberately constructing the appearance of being from overseas. Or, he acknowledged, it could be a carefully constructed deception from closer to home. TMZ's sources close to the investigation said the operating theory among investigators was that the original notes were written by the person responsible, and that the choice of which media outlets received the letters was itself a clue. The first note went to 2 Tucson stations and TMZ. The second went to only one Tucson station. That narrowing, sources said, was consistent with someone local, someone with specific knowledge of Tucson's media landscape, and a reason to communicate through it. Meanwhile, the volume of incoming information has been overwhelming. The sheriff's office said it has received more than 18,000 calls to its tip line since February 1st, with more than 4,000 coming in within a single 24-hour period following the release of the doorbell footage. As the investigation approached its fourth week, the total number of tips across the sheriff's office and FBI combined reached between 40,000 and 50,000. The family's reward escalated to $1 million, with a specific condition attached. It will be paid only for information leading directly to Nancy's recovery. The FBI maintains a separate $100,000 reward for information resulting in an arrest. Savannah Guthrie posted to Instagram on February 24th. Her words were direct. "Someone knows how to find their mother and bring her home." And that is still true. As of this moment, it is still true. And the partial unknown DNA profile sitting in a Florida lab right now may be the scientific thread that makes it a reality. Or it may need help from something far simpler, something anyone watching this video could actually do. That is the final chapter. This is where the science and the silence meet. Today is day 26 of the search for Nancy Guthrie. The home where she lived for more than 50 years, where forensic teams collected swab after swab in the hours after her family called 911, is being returned to her family. Not because the case is closed, not because the investigation has concluded, but because law enforcement no longer needs to restrict access to the property. The evidence that was inside those walls has already been collected. It is in a Florida lab, and it is still being processed. The Pima County Sheriff's Department has said its contracted lab in Florida is continuing to analyze the samples and has not reached a conclusion on whether they are usable. Sheriff Nanos has said he is hopeful the samples will get to a point where they can be submitted for investigative genetic genealogy or entered into CODIS. But, in his own words, we're not there yet. That is the honest, uncomfortable truth of where this investigation stands right now. One partial unknown profile, or low level, mixed. Sitting in a lab that one of the country's leading forensic genealogy companies has publicly called the wrong destination. And a glove with a separate unknown profile that produced no CODIS match and is now being pushed toward genealogy testing, a process that could return a result in 20 minutes or stretch across years. Investigators have not ruled out the possibility that Nancy Guthrie may have been taken by more than one person. No suspect has been publicly named. No person of interest has been identified. Savannah Guthrie's 3 adult children and their spouses have all been cleared. The investigation is active. The leads are still being pursued, and the FBI's technical teams are still combing through back-end data from the doorbell camera, working in partnership with the technology company that built it. Here is what you can do right now. If you have uploaded your DNA to Ancestry, 23andMe, or MyHeritage, download your raw data file today and upload it to GEDmatch or Family Tree DNA. Both platforms allow law enforcement access on an opt-in basis. That single act of consent, from you or from a relative of whoever left that unknown profile inside Nancy Guthrie's home, could be the match that builds the family tree that names the suspect. You may not know that you are connected to this case, but the science does not care whether you know. It only cares whether your data is in the right place. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She is without her daily medication. She cannot walk 50 yards unassisted. And someone whose partial DNA profile is sitting in a laboratory in Florida right now, resistant and incomplete, knows exactly where she is. Sheriff Nanos said it plainly. He believes she will be found. He believes investigators are working as hard and as fast as they possibly can. That belief has to count for something. But belief alone does not solve a case. Science does. And right now, that science needs every data point it can get. If you have been watching this series and this case matters to you, subscribe right now and turn on notifications. Every update to this DNA story, every forensic development, every new lead that surfaces, we will cover it here the moment it breaks. This case is not over. Nancy Guthrie is not forgotten. And the answer may be closer than anyone realizes. It starts with a partial profile. It ends with a name.